Since first reading, administration hosted 2 open houses with approximately 46 people attending over the course of the 2 events. The majority of the attendees were supportive of the proposed separation distances, and communication with the public was consistent that the province's 100-meter buffer from schools would be maintained. We have also since confirmed that the provincial definition of schools includes not only schools on school reserve lands, but also early learning childhood services and home education programs. As such, we have added a new section 4.6.3 to better define the separation distance between uses, that being 100 meters from the common meaning of schools, but excluding early childhood services programs and home education programs from any separation distance. This is consistent with how Beaumont deals with liquor stores and early learning childcare centers. There is currently no separation distances between these 2 uses. As identified at the May 15th Committee of the Whole meeting, given the number and location of early learning childhood programs in the community, any setback requirement could impact future commercial opportunities in Beaumont for both childcare programs and retail stores. One submission was received from Leduc County and they had no concerns. Cannabis consumption and personal use is not a matter that can be addressed through the land use bylaw, as it is an attempt to regulate the user as opposed to land use. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Are there questions from members of council? Councillor Stout.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through Your Worship to Ms. Dargy. Am I right in thinking that there are no provincial healthcare facilities in Beaumont, or the document specifically refers to them?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Stout. That's correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members of council? All right, hearing none. Thank you very much for presenting this evening. Is there anybody in the audience tonight wishing to speak in favor of the land use bylaw amendment? Is there anybody wishing to speak in opposition to the land use bylaw amendment? Is there any person that deems themselves to be affected that wishes to be heard on this matter? Please step up. No, this is specifically for this public hearing for this bylaw. Unregistered presentations coming up in about 5 minutes. All right. So nobody wishes to speak on this matter tonight? Fair enough. All right, the public hearing at this time is now closed. Item 6A, we have no registered presentations, so this is the part where we have unregistered presentations. Is there anybody that wishes to address council this evening? Bear in mind, this is not a typical town hall forum. We'll answer questions if we can, but honestly, this is your chance to come talk to us, and if we need to get answers, we'll probably refer you to admin and we'll get them for you. Anybody wishing to speak? Yeah, please come down, state your name for the record, please sign in, and yeah, you got 5 minutes. Sure.
Yo.
Good evening. Your Worship and Council, my name is Zane Hubbard. I am at 5210 59th Street. You'll have to forgive my ignorance if these questions have already been answered. I only bring up the issue with regards to the public consumption of cannabis, mainly the 3 locations which have been selected, the one that's at 510 and 50th, and again the one behind Colonial, and the last one that's behind the RCMP location. So my concern with this is not so much the consumption, but the liability and insurance related with that. Normally, if you look things from a liquor standpoint, there is a license that is required to operate in public. Those usually have an issuance of a license as well as insurance behind them. And I understand if we allow for public consumption of cannabis, we are basically promoting public intoxication in those regions. And how will we address and police those areas more? The bigger concern being, how do we ensure that and ensure that nobody gets hurt while on those locations, and if they do, who is liable, how is that cost covered, and is that being passed off to the taxpayer?
Okay, we're going to have to slow down and break this down a bit because I think you're confused. Those 3 locations that you mentioned,
Yes.
are those retail stores?
No, they're not. They are the public consumption sites that were proposed during the 2 sessions that you guys had.
All right, I'm going to have to defer to admin on this question. Mr. Hiltz.
Thank you, Your Worship, and members of council. During the public open houses, we proposed various questions, and one of them was where could public consumption occur in Beaumont, or if it was restricted to some sites, where could public consumption occur? They were just basically out there as floating to get public reaction. At this point, within the results and discussions and stuff like that, we have not formed our bylaw yet. This is basically we're looking at the public feedback that we did receive from those public open houses and from the survey that was conducted.
Fair enough.
So on that point, I have 2 things to make. Your survey is heavily flawed. You can enter in whatever you want as many times as you want. It's not IP address located, so be careful. If you have somebody that wants to put in 1,000 opinions, they can.
Yeah,
So-
no, fair enough. But yeah, I think you bring up some good points. But yeah, we haven't seen the bylaws that's been formulated yet, so we'll keep those comments in mind as it comes forward and invite you to come back when that
That's
bylaw-
fine. I just like to have those points addressed and at least taken into consideration because we are opening ourselves up there. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Mr. Hills?
Thank you, Worship. And I would also like to address the IP address question regarding the public survey. We do have enterprise membership with SurveyMonkey, and we also use Metaform, which allows us to take out any multiple responses from a single IP address. So that gets done in our surveys that we do put out. So basically, unless a person is very crafty and they do one survey at home and then one at work, that they could do 2 at that point, but they could not do multiple within the same address from their home.
Fair enough. We're not going to get into an argument about IP addresses. All right, is there anybody else wishing to speak to council on any matter this evening? All right, moving on. Business item 7A, Beaumont Cannabis Consumption Survey Results. I'd like to invite Chief Cook and Sergeant Springham.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. As you're very much aware, the purpose of our presentation tonight is to provide council a high-level review of the public survey and open house opinions and results as received by the town of Beaumont. And equally as important is we're here to seek direction on the forthcoming bylaw for which the town of Beaumont administration plans desires to bring back to council for first reading on September 11th, 2018. And of course, that is in efforts to meet the federally legislator mandated date of October 17th for the legalization of cannabis. Your Worship, if council chooses to do nothing, the consumption of cannabis in Beaumont will be aligned with smoking tobacco and regulated under the authority of the Alberta Tobacco Smoking Reduction Act and the Alberta Gaming, Liquor and Cannabis Act. A highlight of these restrictions include no smoking in a public place or workplace, in a vehicle where minors are present, within 5 meters of a doorway or air intake, and of course no minor shall partake in the consumption of either tobacco or cannabis. On July 17th, Committee of the Whole directed Administration to conduct a survey for which 711 entries were submitted on the consumption of cannabis. As well, Administration participated in the 2 open houses that were planned in regards to the land use bylaw, where we were able to engage residents in addition to the land use bylaw, but on the consumption of cannabis. We estimate that over 50 residents were in attendance. As a highlight, if consumption was permitted, or pardon me, our results of our engagement, if consumption was permitted, the majority of responses favored restricting the consumption of cannabis from schools and schoolyards, child centers, parks, playgrounds, sports fields, followed by played routes, special events, sidewalks, and walking trails. Over 43 residents in the survey identified the favor of banning the consumption of cannabis within Beaumont. 57% of residents do not disapprove of the consumption with restrictions, and if designated locations were identified to consume cannabis, residents favored extended and visibly restricted distances from minors and the general public. 46% of residents favored aligning the consumption of cannabis to the current Alberta Liquor and Gaming Act, so that's aligning the smoking of cannabis with the drinking of alcohol. And 73% of respondents favored applying the same restrictions to smoking tobacco as cannabis. Your Worship, administration is seeking direction from Council on the creation of a new bylaw addressing the consumption of cannabis here in Beaumont. Considerations for the bylaw include permitting the consumption of cannabis within Beaumont utilizing restrictions as outlined in provincial regulations and acts, or a public ban with permitted use areas, designated setbacks, and availability at special events, or, of course, an all-out ban on the consumption of cannabis, excluding private residents here in the town of Beaumont. As indicated, administration is prepared to return to Council on September 11th with a draft of a bylaw for a first reading. And with that, I'd like to answer any questions Council may have.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So just so I'm clear on what you're looking for tonight, is you're looking for us to pick one of those three options to form that new bylaw?
Correct.
Fair enough. Is Council clear on the three options? Yes, no? Councilor Barnhart?
I'm going to be brave and say I'm not entirely clear. If you could just for me outline the differences between what we would get between the first bullet and the second. Because I understand permitted use areas, but then I'm also wondering about all the provincial regulations that say permitting the consumption utilizing restrictions. So to me, it's murky. I just would like real clarity on what's the difference between the first bullet and the second bullet.
Certainly. Bullet number 1, permitting the consumption of cannabis within Beaumont utilizing the restrictions as outlined in the provincial regulations and acts, is if we were to do nothing, we would then fall under rules that are already in place with respect to smoking tobacco and the consumption of cannabis. Simply 5 meters away from a doorway, you would be able to consume cannabis, and the alike. Number 2, a public ban with permitted use areas, designated setbacks, and special events. I would interpret that as, or I explain that as, we could designate specific locations throughout the community for the consumption of cannabis. We could impose our own restrictions or regulations around the consumption of cannabis, such as further setbacks from businesses, parks, and the like. And building on that, that is where Council would give us direction to create the new bylaw. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Yeah, normally we put a motion out there and ask questions, but I think in order to better formulate which motion we want to put forward, does anybody have any questions they would like to ask the Chief and his staff? Councillor Monkoff-Swain.
I waited as long as I could.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
No one's jumping up. I just wanted to get your feedback if you know the answer to this. But one of the conversations, and a gentleman up here earlier raised the question regarding, I guess it would be 1.2, where you got some permitted use areas, and so using the example of Airdrie, where they've got their community and they've got kind of pockets where they've said, okay, this is where you're going to be permitted use. Mm-hmm. Do you know the answer? The question was around impact of liabilities around insurance and all that sort of stuff. Are we aware of how they're addressing that in Airdrie?
To Councillor Monkoff-Swain, through your worship, I don't. I can honestly say that I do not. Look to a technical expert.
Nothing that I'm aware of at this time. It's a point well raised, but it's getting into for us when we're to uncharted territory.
Yep.
Creating these types of areas, but I don't know anything specific to Airdrie.
Okay, no, and I'll just reiterate the comment from the gentleman that would be good information to have going forward, and I didn't expect you to have it offhand. I just thought I'd quickly ask. So, yeah, I'll leave it there. I got lots of other things, but I'll.
Mr. Hiltz?
Thank you, Worship. One of the things that will be happening prior to bringing back the bylaw on September 11th will be a full legal review of the bylaw. So that'll be able to provide that context of what we can and cannot do around that bylaw as well.
Councillor Stout?
Thank you, Worship. Through your worship to Mr. Cook. I just wanted to comment about the report. I have to tell you that the results of the report of the survey results, which I found profoundly flawed to the extent that, well, the questions are, to my mind, confusing and in places incomprehensible, with the result that the results as presented I find unfathomable, really. I don't really know what most of these things are actually telling me. And critically, as a result, I can't really judge what the public mood is on any of these issues, really. This is so confusing and so internally contradictory. I've 30 years experience professionally in data analysis, and if this was presented to me in a professional capacity, I would reject it and have it redone. I think we're in a position now where we don't have time for that luxury, but I don't think this helps me make a decision at all regarding how to proceed from here.
Fair enough. Councillor Van Newkirk.
Through your worship to Mr. Cook, when the last time I spoke and provided opinion and thoughts on this, I broke it down into 3 pieces, and I said protect the vulnerable, keep it simple, keep it enforceable. If we looked at something in the first bullet, aligning with preferential regulations, then that would be, aligning with tobacco use and such. Just a question specific to Beaumont. How many tickets would have been issued against or through the use of our smoking bylaw in the last year or 2 in Beaumont? I'm assuming probably low, but just wondering there, just for some perspective on that.
Right. Certainly, to
Councillor, puts you on the spot. I'm sorry.
To Councillor Van Newkirk, through your worship, unfortunately, I can't answer that. I don't know. I don't have that information, and our municipal supervisor may have that question, but we're also looking at under 3 months or 4 months on the job. So
yeah,
based on what I've seen so far, just on our stats, I've been trying to get ahead of the game on. I haven't seen anything as of yet, and you'd be correct to say there would be a low number charging under the smoking bylaw.
Fair enough. That's my point for now.
Okay, so I'm going to try and help frame this discussion. So here's what we as council sort of have to decide. There's 2 schools of thought. We can treat it like alcohol and it's an intoxicant, and treat it the same as alcohol. So you can't drink out anywhere. You can't drink out in public, so you can't smoke out in the public and things like that. Or you can, because it's we're talking about the smoking of marijuana, we can treat it like it's part of the smoking bylaw. But the problem is it's something you can smoke that's also an intoxicant. So we got to try and find that balance between, exactly what he said, protecting the young, keeping it simple, keeping it enforceable. And so it sort of depends upon where you want to go. Because the second decision coming forward is, do we align it with the tobacco smoking bylaw? But that opens up a whole nother host of questions, because tobacco is legal. So what do you do with everybody that smokes in a business and goes outside to have their smoke break? Are you going to let them go? You ban it totally publicly and you align it with smoking? Are we going to let them go home every hour if it was our company? So those are the kind of things that we have to talk about. So I don't quite know where to go. I'm sort of leaning towards option 2, public ban with permitted use areas. That leaves things like beer gardens and things like that you can get one-time permits and things for. Could be treated the same way. I'm not necessarily into a total all-out ban, because I think that might be unenforceable or very hard to enforce, but I'll let the experts weigh in on that one.
Actually, your worship, sorry, if I may, we have arranged for legal consultation on the bylaw, on a draft bylaw once we leave here tonight with direction. And In that conversation, I would like to share with council that the firm is very busy with this type of bylaw and review, of course, just given the timelines and such. And the comments that were provided, or comment that was provided to me this morning, as a matter of fact, was that it's easier to make the bylaw a little bit on the tougher side and to pull back, if you will, rather than go the other direction.
Fair enough.
I just wanted to share that with your worship.
Thank you. Councillor Daniluk, haven't heard from you yet tonight.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, gentlemen. I attend a couple of the open houses that people attend from the town. My social circles and people I know, very few people I know actually smoke. So I'm a bit biased here because many people I've been talking to around town are of the opinion that, as the survey suggests, that people want cannabis and smoking treated the same way. They don't want one standard for smoking, one standard for cannabis in the same municipality, being Beaumont. I'm of the same opinion myself personally. I don't smoke, so I'm trying to be unbiased in my view here, looking at the bigger picture. A concern I have with the designated area is that, as Mayor Stewart mentioned, cannabis is a recognized intoxicant, right? So if you were to have an area you could go and smoke cannabis, want to have a beer at the same time, because it's also an intoxicant. So if you're going to let people smoke cannabis in a certain area of town, why can't have a beer in the same area? You can't walk down the street having a beer in Beaumont because it's not legal. So I'm concerned if we have an area for cannabis use, why can't you have a beer at the same time, or vodka or something? So I'm trying to find, again, that fair ground between all parties. I am leaning towards the total ban, based on my experience with people I've been talking to. A couple of people who came to open houses, they're smokers themselves. They say they like walking down the street, walking their dog, having a smoke, but they don't want people doing the same thing with cannabis. And I said, okay, then how do we enforce that? So they should be the same for everything. Either it's a total ban, or it's the Wild West. Everyone gets to do everything they want. And I'm concerned about enforcement and extra costs in the town to hire additional resources to monitor the cannabis situation if we went to some kind of public availability to smoke cannabis. So I'm leaning towards, at least initially right now, I'm leaning towards a total ban that may affect some of our people who smoke in town, cigarettes. I understand that, but I'm having difficulty justifying or estimating the cost of enforcement if we have one set of rules for people who smoke cigarettes, one set of rules for people who smoke cannabis. And the majority, despite my colleagues' concern with the survey, and I do respect your opinions with your educational background, but on face value of the survey, 3/4 of the people in town want smoking and cannabis treated the same way. And if people don't want to have cannabis walking down the street, you can't have a cigarette walking down the street if they're treated the same. So I'm leaning towards, personally, option 3 being the outright ban. As you mentioned, normally, Mr. Cook, that it may be more restrictive now. It can be lessened off as time goes on. If there's a huge debate among the public, if we went too far, we can always come back. It's hard to say one rule for smoking, one rule for cannabis, and then change your mind later saying, not working out, let's have a total ban after the fact. That would be very hard to do, and I'm of the opinion, at least initially, that an all-out ban in public areas for smoking and non-smoking. I do have one question, if you don't mind, if you can maybe tell me. So people live in apartments right now, and they have a balcony. Can they smoke on their balcony as far as the town of Beaumont's rules go, or does the apartment that they live in or the condo they live in have rules on their balcony? I don't consider a balcony to be a public place. So I know you can't, if you can't smoke in public, can you still smoke on your balcony through the bylaw? Does the current bylaw allow people to smoke on their balcony in an apartment or condo, or does the apartment and the condo have rules that governs smoking on a balcony?
As it stands right now.
Thank you.
Sorry.
To Councillor Daniluk, through your worship, I'd like to have our Municipal Supervisor Jason Springham answer that question for us, if we may.
Thank you. Sorry. Jump right in. You know, right now that is a concern because we're not dealing with multi-use residents, or sorry, multi-residential type units. There are a few bylaws that we've looked at. They are including, but it's not the norm in municipalities. But right now, there wouldn't be that control. So if anybody's in an apartment right now, when it comes to what we're currently looking at, there would be no restriction. So you could smoke cannabis.
Ms. Schultz?
Thank you, Your Worship, and members of council. Within the, I guess, each municipality, each apartment building would be able to set their own rules around that in terms of they allow smoking or smoking of cannabis within their said units or within their balconies.
Thank you. Councillor Stout.
Thank you, Your Worship. Cannabis seems to me that it is both an intoxicant and is commonly consumed by smoking. And then the question arises, what do we treat it like we treat tobacco smoking, or do we treat it like we treat alcohol? If it has the properties of both, and we are to restrict its use, which I think we're agreed we will provide some restriction, then we need, I think, to acknowledge that it has the properties of both smoking and alcohol consumption, and that consequently the most restrictive rule in either case would be the one that applies. So in answer to Councillor Danlock's comment, no, I can't walk down the street drinking a beer. That would be illegal. So neither should I be able to do the same with cannabis, and for the same reasons. Similarly, I can't smoke in a public place. I can't smoke cannabis in a public place because I can't smoke tobacco in a public place. And again, I think the same rule should apply. I note that the survey question number 3, and yes, as I've said, I regard the survey as quite flawed. This is the least flawed of the questions, I thought, with the exception of the location one. But I noticed that the most popular solution of the 3 that are being offered to us was the one to ban the consumption of cannabis in public, excluding private residences. If that was, looking at that pie chart, could we just crank that up a little bit? If that was an election, then the Green Party is forming a majority government. So as far as I can tell from the admittedly flawed survey, I think that is the option that has the most popular support. And that's the one I'm leaning to as well.
That was a good analogy. Sorry. Okay, Councillor Barnhart.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks to my colleagues, because it's complex to try to figure out where to go at this point, because we don't have the details in front of us in terms of what the bylaw would actually, how you would implement it. And I'm just questioning your process. Then you'd like us to reach a consensus on which one of the 3 bullets, and then they come back with the draft, and then we.
Well, yeah, we got to sort of
questions.
provide them a direction to give us a draft that we can then debate the draft.
Okay. Well, if you want my.
If you're prepared to make a motion, I'm prepared to get a motion on the table. But
I would be prepared to make a motion. It may not be what 2 people on my left-hand side wanted me to say, but I'm kind of leaning towards the second bullet, and I would suggest that with the bylaw, consider a public ban in public places, but there be permitted use areas, and the proper controls be in place so that those areas are not bothersome to other people, whether it be liability or insurance, or where those places are is going to be tricky. Totally get that. But I'm thinking of the way we allow alcohol to be sold at events and festivals. We have that licensed. So perhaps there's a way that we can do this in a way that it's allows people to enjoy themselves publicly, but not to bother others who don't want to be enjoying the same substance. So I'm not leaning towards an all-out ban for the simple reason that I don't think we can really monitor and enforce that to the extent we would have to.
Okay, and, so you're going to move motion 2?
My concern.
Okay, so Councillor Barnhart has moved a public ban with permitted use areas, designated setbacks, and special events. But I'm just going to go out on a limb and say you define permitted use areas as special events, and I don't think you're talking about setting up permanent locations.
I wouldn't mind, Your Worship, if they came back with some of those options.
Okay.
Bylaw, because I don't know the ins and outs of this well enough, and I think trying to make a decision without having all that information right now is
fair enough.
It's flawed.
We can have a look at it again when the bylaw comes in. All right, and just so council's aware, it doesn't alter the fact that if we don't like what it comes back as, we can still put in the public ban at item. We change the bylaw when the bylaw comes back. Councillor Van Newkirk.
Well, thanks, Your Worship. A few comments and discussion points. as the folks who elected me expect, I've done research and homework. I've been kind of holding back, and I got a page full of notes here, and I've talked to regional counterparts and regional councillors. So just want to let a bunch fly, if that's okay.
Let her rip.
Okay. Speaking with a couple of regional councillors, one in St. Albert where they just went through the full-out ban and walking down that path. One in another neighboring county that is working down a path that is going to be probably hard to follow and restrictive and hard to enforce. Keeping it simple, keeping it enforceable is a couple ways to go. I was doing some research as well and found the Alberta Health Services recommendations for municipal cannabis regulations. It's a February 20th, 2018 document, and just like to read a quick section out of here. AHS recommends that municipalities implement regulations banning consumption in public places, as well as for public intoxication. The rationale for this is twofold. Cannabis is an intoxicating substance and should therefore be treated similarly to alcohol. And harms, number two, harms related to second and third-hand smoke, especially for children and youth. Second-hand cannabis smoke is more mutagenic and psychotoxic than tobacco smoke, and therefore second-hand inhalation of cannabis should be considered a health risk. And then they provide their backups for that source. They also speak in here about the normalization of smoking that could occur and is likely to occur if children and those who are impressionable start seeing these smokers' corners per se, be it green or brown smoke. When we talk about a public ban, it's easier to step back, as Chief Cook has said. If we looked at an all-out ban, no municipality, I think, is going to get it perfect the first time. I'm not afraid to say that. I think we're going to put our best efforts forward, but after some reflection time, we're probably going to want to make changes. I think it might be important for us to take a cautious, measured approach, monitor it, and it's always easier to relax regulations rather than loosen them. The research that I've done, reviewing the survey, I do take a lot of I put a lot of clout in what the AHS has to say and the recommendations that they've done, and there's seminar after seminar after seminar out there when you start Googling this. But I think it's easier to start in a place where we have a public ban and then walk back from that as we, our province and our nation, learn more around it. St. Albert went as far as, in their first reading here, to also include edibles, and edibles aren't a thing yet. That's my comments on that. One last comment on designated areas in Beaumont. I have a hard time with the designated areas. I attended the open house at the Aquafit. I couldn't make the Centreville one. There were people who understood the map with the red dots at the north and south in the one southwest quadrant. There were others that didn't. Administration did a good job of explaining what those were and what they were all about. Personally, I would have a hard time with designated smoking areas in the locations that were put up there because they're at the entrances to our town. And I think that having something at the entrance to our town where there's a green X there and it's the OK zone for smoking cannabis, I don't think that's okay. I don't want that to be the impression that people get when they come to Beaumont from the north or south, and most of our traffic comes from there. And I think it's important that we really think about who we are and more importantly, who we want to be as a community. I really look forward to the future discussion around how we wrap this all together with tobacco. So, thank you.
Okay. Just making sure. Councillor Montgomery.
Okay. Firstly, I'll start off by saying that when this first came up, my position was I wanted to start at a total ban, including cannabis, tobacco, start there, and then go out and see where we end up. And I want to thank administration for going through and conducting that survey. That was certainly a discussion that had occurred throughout the public, where we had spent a lot of time asking questions about retail and where to sell it, but not as much about consumption. You heard that, so thank you for going through that process. I'd also like to echo Councillor Van Nieuwkerk's comments about, I also reached out to other councillors in the region, but also a lot of business owners here at home. And where this discussion occurred was around lumping in tobacco with cannabis and some of the implications on that. So I'm going to touch on that in a second. I do want to be clear for the record, I'm not in favour of designated sites. I personally think it's an awful idea. I can't see anyone wanting that in their community. Whether it's the entrance to the town or whether it's tucked away in a little spot, it's a non-starter for me. I want to clarify. I want to make sure that we're aware when we're talking about no smoking in public places. Our bylaw is very loose. We say banning in public spaces, but I don't think that is exactly what the general public would think that is. So I want to just quickly speak to it, where we talk about designated public places, so public buildings and those within 6 meters of entrance, town buildings and those within 6 meters of an entrance or exit, public transportation vehicle shelters, or workplaces within 6 meters of an entrance. So to me, when I read that, you can still smoke in a park, in a school, along a trail. So I think whenever I've engaged residents and even had some conversations with councillors, and they say ban in public, oh yeah, but our smoking bylaw does that. We've got to be careful there, that we need to, and I caution leaning on that too much. Again, the study that was referenced from Alberta Health Services talked about banning at public places. That's kind of where I'm going, and I'll summarize it in a second, but I want to caution that we don't, our smoking bylaw, when we say designated public places, doesn't mean, it doesn't ban it from parks, trails, schools, that sort of thing, right? So I want to really emphasize that point. I also want to be careful about a potential overcorrection with regards to tobacco, and the Mayor brought it up earlier. Like I mentioned, I was initially in favour of lumping it in, tobacco and cannabis smoking, from a simplification perspective. Again, that was a key thing for me to make sure it was easily understandable. But engaging with a lot of residents through the open house process and business owners, just chatting with them, a lot of concern about the total ban that has been put forward by 3 councillors today. If we're going to a total ban and we're lumping in tobacco into that, then if I'm going to have a dinner somewhere downtown, or anywhere for that matter, if we have a total ban, I can't walk out of that restaurant or bar and have a cigarette or light up cannabis. So I think that is going to have a really negative impact to our business industry. And if I'm a resident and I want to go and spend 3 hours out and have a good night, if I'm a smoker, which I don't know the population, but roughly around 20% if you look at the national average, I'm not going to go and do that. But if I can't walk out of there and have a cigarette, so again, I started at a total ban, but I think we need to loosen that up a little bit. I agree with Councillor Barnhart's motion that she's put on the floor, the second one where we talk about restrictions, and so on these complicated matters, what I like to do is trying to paint my vision on where I'd like to see it happen, where I'd like to see it get to, but I also think that we don't have to go about tobacco right away. We can just clean up cannabis, and then if we want to, make a notice of motion and go through the tobacco to line it up at a different point. I do think it's important for us to get in front of the October 17th date. So my vision for this is to have a ban of cannabis, exactly the same as the smoking bylaw, where the designated public places that I mentioned, but I'd like to add the parks, trails and schools map that we have. So we've got one out there where essentially basically any of our public designated spaces, if we look through the land use bylaw, where you've got, like I mentioned, you've got trails, school sites, everything along those lines. My vision would be that that's where you'd link tobacco and cannabis in. That would then allow, it would allow you to walk outside a restaurant downtown and have a cigarette or smoke cannabis, but it wouldn't allow you to be in a playground. It wouldn't allow you to smoke cannabis or tobacco. It wouldn't allow you to be walking your dog along one of the trails to smoke tobacco or cannabis. So that is my vision for it, where you've got the public spaces identified currently. For example, this building here, we've got over 100 staff members that work here. If we had a total ban, again, these staff members, it's not just the restaurant industry, but these staff members wouldn't be able to go out and have a cigarette 6 meters away. What does that do? What does that do for our business? So I want to be really careful that we don't go on a overcorrection and try and the concern about oversimplifying it. So I guess to wrap it up, I think we should go ahead with Councillor Barnhart's motion. I support it, but I would like to see, when the bylaw comes back, I'd like to see the addition of public spaces and trails, and I'm not going to get all the technical jargon right, but you kind of know what I mean. I can give you the map if that's what you want. I'd like to see that as part of it and combine that with tobacco. So that's where I am. I'm not in favor of a total ban. I'd like to see the existing ban with those restrictions of what I consider and what I think the general public would consider public places. Those are my comments.
Okay, I appreciate that. Okay, I'm just going to refocus this discussion a little bit because Councillor Barnhart put a motion on the floor. Like, don't get me wrong, all your comments about smoking and everything, they're very valid, and please remember them, because that's the next decision we're going to have to make, is we're going to have a discussion surrounding whether or not we're going to marry the bylaw together with smoking or not. So right now the question before us is if exactly we're going to do what you said, have that vision, permitted uses, and that smoking piece is the second big piece decision we'll make in a second, or after we're completed this. And so, yeah, I know there's two other councillors waiting to speak. If it's in relation to moving together with the smoking, we'll carry that on as a second discussion shortly. Are there any questions about the motion or discussion about the motion that's currently on the floor? Councillor Van Newkirk.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just more of a point of clarification. You know, when I say I'm supporting the ban, I'm speaking to cannabis solely. So just bullet point 3, and and then I was looking forward to what fellow councillors have to say in the upcoming discussion. So just for clarity, when I say all-out ban, I'm talking about all-out ban on the consumption of cannabis, as in bullet point 3 is where my support would be, just for ultimate clarity.
Yeah, no, fair enough, because that's what we're talking about right now, is just cannabis. Smoking is the next discussion to follow. Councillor Daniluk.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick comment from my end here. One of my previous councillors mentioned that there may be more enforcement issues if you have a ban for smoking and cannabis together. I would counter that by suggesting that once people, if the ban did go forward, once people know you can't smoke in public places or cannabis or tobacco, they're going to adjust their behavior. For example, I've lived in Beaumont for 12 years now. I can't recall a situation of someone walking down the street having a beer in their hand, because everyone knows you can't drink in public, so people don't do it. I think if we did take the step of having the ban, the first little while there may be some people who want to challenge it because they want to challenge it. There may be initial flurry of some tickets possibly, but once people know if the ban went forward, I believe there'll be less enforcement, because everyone knows you can't smoke in public, tobacco or cannabis, and I would expect we have less enforcement issues as opposed to having more enforcement issues. Thank you.
Fair enough. Any further discussion on the motion? Councillor Moncaswayne. Actually, you're still on.
Thank you. So, Councillor Van Newkirk very eloquently clarified his position, so I feel I should do mine after my ramble. So I support the motion with the addition, support the motion with regards to cannabis, with the addition that we add the recreation parks, etc. So that's where I'm at.
No, because I think that's just more information gathering, and they'll bring back those options. Because I sort of agree with Councillor Moncaswayne. I want to include those places. I'm not in favor of having a permanent place in a park to go smoke cannabis, but I like the way Councillor Moncaswayne sort of went through it, is sort of my vision as well. Mr. Hiltz.
Thank you, Your Worship. Prior to deciding that motion, it might be prudent to hear Mr. Cook and the clause out of the St. Albert's bylaw, and it basically talks to what you're talking about right now. Their all-out ban is not really an all-out ban, so he can refer back to their actual bylaw and bring clarity to that.
Thank you. Mr. Ritt.
Thank you, General Manager Hiltz. In the City of St. Albert bylaws presented and found on their website, bylaw number 30/2018, prohibition smoking and vaping. Point number 7, except as permitted in this bylaw, no person shall engage in cannabis smoking activity, period. Point number 8, a person who is 18 years of age or older may smoke cannabis, A, inside private living accommodations, B, on or within private residential property, C, in an area specifically reserved for smoking by the proprietor of an outdoor public event, so much like a beer garden, and D, while traveling on a sidewalk that is at least 5 meters away from one and doorway, window, air intake of a building, a patio, a park, or St. Albert Place transit centers, recreational amenities, fire hall, recycle yards, police stations, civic workplaces.
Yeah, pretty much sums it up. It's close.
I said one thing in the media, and I said one thing in the bylaw.
Yeah, that's just you noticed that too, did you? Yeah. Councillor Barnhart.
If I may, Your Worship, I wonder if, when we're seeking consensus here, if the councillors who are thinking a total ban might consider something similar to what you just read out, because I think that is the way I understand number 2 in these choices. And the motion that I put forward to me is that it's a ban in public places where it would be impacting to children, it would be impacting to people walking by, it would be impacting on the trails. I'm all for that. But when it comes to having some place where people can go, we're trying to find a place where it's less of a nuisance to other people and permit it. So perhaps I'm looking for something that's not there, but I'm wondering if those that are thinking an all-out ban number 3 bullet here are thinking something more similar to that, and we're closer together than we think. Because if this comes down to a vote, then we have to vote again to figure out what we're sending it away, because we're not there yet. So I'm reaching out for consensus if I can find it.
Councillor Danlock.
Thank you. In response to Councillor Barnhart's suggestion, I understand where you're going with that, and I'm going to give some thought to that as we're sitting here, but Chief Cook, if you don't mind reading that one part of the bylaw where it said you could walk down the sidewalk smoking a joint, right, but not within 5 meters of a doorway. So I'm just trying to get my head around that for a moment, because I was under the impression they had a complete ban. This is not what I anticipated in the media. They said very clearly it was a complete ban. So bear with me just for a moment, bear with me for a second. So if I heard that correctly, I'm being facetious for a point here. If I'm walking down Centreville on the Pizza Hut Chartier side of the sidewalk with a joint, I can't, because there's businesses right there within 5 meters of the sidewalk. But if I'm walking on the other side of the sidewalk that has the houses and the insurance office well back from the sidewalk, I could smoke a joint walking down that side of the sidewalk. I'm being facetious, but the way I read that, I can smoke a joint on the left side, but not the right side of the sidewalk going down Centreville. Is that a correct interpretation of that clause in the bylaw?
To Councillor Danlock, through your worship, that is how I would interpret it, yes. When I read this bylaw, reread the bylaw after hearing what we did in the media, where I considered was the fact straight across the street from us between the dollar store and this corner on the northwest corner of the intersection before the skate park, that falls, in my opinion, within these parameters, so it would be permitted there.
If I may, Your Worship, then as a follow-up, so from an enforcement perspective, I'm looking at our peace officer and sitting in front of me, and he's walking down the street doing his job, and he's on the Chartier side of the sidewalk, and you see somebody smoking a joint, that's a ticket, whereas the same person walking on the other side won't get a ticket. It becomes more of an enhanced enforcement issue, would it not? I'm just trying to draw home a point, not to drag things on, but I'm seeing more of an enforcement issue there in my example than less enforcement. And that concerns me, because then when our peace officers are busy enough as it is, and our bylaw officers are busy enough, do we have time to be...
We don't necessarily have to adopt that clause.
No, I'm just suggesting, if I'm interpreting that correctly, that concerns... Okay, I appreciate my point.
It's going to be hard to enforce.
Thank you.
Care to make a comment before I move on?
Yeah, and I'm just going to add on to that, and that's when we're getting into either bylaw revision or putting together a new bylaw. Some things look great on paper, and translating that onto the street and how that works, I think that's the key here for us going forward. We're right, we're probably not going to find the perfect bylaw. And I think a lot of municipalities are, the more I sort of do my own research and try to reach out to my other counterparts in my enforcement world, it's one of those things that we're not going to find that perfect key for the door. And for us, again, it's aligning the tobacco with cannabis. A lot of municipalities are kind of separating the two and creating that sort of clean sort of look to their documents. And I guess that's something, to consider as well going forward.
Councillor Montgomery.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate, and the reason, because I mean, you said you're being facetious. I don't think you were. I think that was exactly the question that people want to know. And so, again, reiterating the point that everyone knows what's a school, what's a park. You don't need to figure out, am I within 5 meters? Can I walk along Chartier and then maybe skirt out 5 meters and I'm still okay? You know, if you're on a trail, you're on a park, and so that's the clean version that I was looking for. So I appreciate you still may not want people to walk down past Centreville smoking cannabis. I get that, but the vision that I was going for cleans that up. So you don't need to be, there's no ambiguity on whether you're on a sidewalk. Basically, it would allow you to smoke on the sidewalk, was where I was going. So I think you summarized it well.
Councillor Van Newkirk.
Thank you, Your Worship. A couple more comments, I guess, subsequent to bullet point 3 and where I'm at. A question for Mr. Cook. If you could comment on the enforceability of our actual trail system, understanding that we're in a complaint-based system, likely, atmosphere for this. I don't think we're going to be monitoring the trails and jumping in the Kubota and going around and driving the trail system to make sure that we're, created something that's enforceable. People want to see, in my view, and from what I've heard from people, is if you're going to enforce something, you can't expect unless you inspect, I guess. And if you expect people to follow the bylaw, but yet you don't go see if they are, then it's going to be tough. We have, I should have looked it up, but we have a vast trail system with lots of kilometers of trails. Just if you could comment on the enforceability, if we did include, as suggested by Councillor Monkoff-Swain, that map and the hundreds of kilometers, perhaps, that we have in trails, maybe it's not that much, but it's vast. What does the enforceability on that look like? Would your officers have time to inspect, or would it be a complaint-based system where you would find an ashed out handful of dust?
To Councillor Newark, through your worship, if I may. You're correct. It is complaint-based driven today. That is how our enforcement services do operate. Having said that, enforcement services, I would describe as moving forward is taking more of a proactive approach with getting into the community. For example, we are looking at beginning bike patrols during special events and weather permitting, of course, getting out, being more visible in the public. In addition to that, too, we've equipped our officers with the necessary tools to be a distance away from their patrol vehicle, allowing them to walk on trails, allowing them the necessary tools and the protection in order to do that. We also have the RCMP in town as well, and the detachment which can be utilized. Would we catch everybody? No. Just to be perfectly honest with you, absolutely not. Would it be complaint-based? Yes, it would. I'm certain that would be plenty initially, where we would see a dramatic rise and perhaps a valley shortly after that. I don't know if Jason can add any more with that. However, that is how we foresee it moving forward initially.
Based on my other experience in other communities when it comes to sort of the pre-cannabis legalization, there's a lot of times where we're finding a lot of our users were sort of off the beaten path and in the green spaces, or they didn't want to be seen. And I think I can concur with Chief Cook that the difficulty of being reactive. We're probably not going to get to that complaint if it gets phoned in and they're somewhere deep in the trail and we're doing the response. So Proactive is obviously a great approach to that, but there'd be limitations.
Okay, we sort of got off track and went down the enforcement rabbit hole. Just to keep everybody on track, we're not trying to write this bylaw tonight or try to figure out how to enforce a bylaw that hasn't been written yet. But I'd just like to point out that option 2 does allow the staff to look at that and come back with an enforcement plan. I think we've beat the enforcement to horse to death tonight. We know it's going to be tough. We know there's going to be some issues. So I recommend we pick an option and let the staff go back, or let administration go back, and then come back with a report with the bylaw on how to sort of enforce that. Agreed? Fair enough? No. Councillor Montgaf-Swain.
Sorry, that's one way to let it quietly keep my mic off.
Oh, sorry. Well, you got to stop turning your own mic on.
Sorry, I appreciate where you're going, but I have to jump in here. So with respect to the comments, I completely disagree. I don't think it's about enforceability. It's about setting a culture for what we want our community to be. Alcohol is banned on our trails, and we don't have these guys riding around on Kubotas trying to ping people on alcohol. So I just caution us around sensationalizing this. 18-20% maybe smoke marijuana in Alberta. When this comes in, my personal view, I don't think it's going to skyrocket to 50 and there's going to be a big green cloud of smoke over Beaumont. So I just want to caution that we shouldn't be trying to set a bylaw based on, sure, we need to make it simple for you guys, but we should be setting a bylaw for what we think of Beaumont. What is our vision for Beaumont? It's a safe space for our kids and our community, and I don't think we need to worry too much. Sure, these guys are going to be able to come back to us and report about how difficult it is, but again, worrying about whether on a trail or not from an enforcement perspective, I don't think we should be concerned about that. Back to the motion, we've got an option here that is asking administration to go back and provide the first reading of a bylaw that we can debate at length. I think there's three positions here that are for a total ban. I'll say 2.5 because I'm not sure exactly where you're at, and I know Councillor Hendricks will jump in here in a second, but yeah, I just wanted to speak to that. But I think I've heard the discussion, so I think you've got options in front of you to come back, and first reading gives us a whole bunch of opportunities to debate and change and all that sort of thing. So thank you.
Councillor Van Newkirk, final comment before the vote.
During one of the times that I had spoke before, I shared an anecdotal story about friends and their dogs eating a roach off the ground and heading off into the $800 sunset of the emergency vet clinic. In some of the research that I was doing, I did encounter a municipality that included a dog park as a permitted area, for instance. I don't change my stance on where I'm at, but I did want to share that is we have a very big dog culture in Beaumont, and we would need to ensure that people are getting rid of their refuse in a proper manner, and it's going to be, there will be harm to animals, and it's a fact because dogs lick and smell and eat, and it's a thing that's going to happen, and it's real. Kelowna experiences more of that now because there's probably more of a freewheeling culture there than maybe there might be in Beaumont. So it's my final comment. It's fine.
All right, thank you very much. So motion before us is to, I lost my page, hang on, sorry, is to public ban with permitted use areas, designated setbacks, and special events, taking into account all the feedback you just heard tonight. So call the vote. All in favor? Ooh, that gets defeated 4-3. So need another motion because we have to give them some direction tonight. Councillor Van Newkirk.
I'll put forward the motion for bullet point number 3, an all-out ban on the consumption of cannabis, excluding private residents, as presented.
Okay. All in favor?
Is there no discussion on the motion?
Oh, I guess. Discussion on the motion?
So, all-out ban. Just curious on your thoughts on the feedback that we heard. Taking into the legitimacy of the survey, but I think Bill's anecdote about everyone that he's spoken to would reign true with me about wanting to link the cannabis with tobacco. And I know we're not there yet, but in order for me to be able to vote this way, I need to hear your thoughts on it. If we're going to an all-out ban, how does tobacco then come into that? Are we not going to respect the general consensus around to include tobacco, or are we going to include that as well?
Well, tobacco is the next discussion.
I get that, but in order for me to be able to vote on this one, I would like to get a better understanding of the thoughts around that, because I think if we're going to go ahead and look at a total ban, then that changes the discussion. I just want to make sure that people are aware. If the motion is put forward to ask administration to come back with a total ban, then the conversation around tobacco is going to be directly in front of us. And are we going to ignore the consensus that we're hearing? So I was curious if it's not pertinent, then no worries. It doesn't have to answer the question. I was just curious before voting on this.
Councillor Barnhart.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have an answer for Councillor McCuff-Swain. I don't know did you want to address that to Councillor Van Newkirk? Is that what you were? Because my point was somewhat similar but different in that one of the reasons I don't think that number 3 is going to fly in terms of developing a bylaw is that I think it's going to be relatively unenforceable, and it may be for the reason that you're saying around the smoking. Because someone has smoke coming out of their mouth, how do we know if it's cannabis or do we know if it's cigarette? So to me that makes that one kind of difficult, and people are going to do it, they're going to get away with it, and they'll continue to do it. So I think if we make it clear that we're being reasonable and we have something other than an all-out ban, it's legalized, and it's, in my mind, it's kind of where alcohol is, and just because I don't like to do it doesn't mean that it's wrong. People can do it. They can drink alcohol. They can use cannabis. I don't want kids doing it. I don't want it done in public places. I don't want it to be a nuisance. But honestly, I think an all-out ban is going to put us on the map as being pretty far back, and I don't think it's enforceable.
Further discussion on the motion? All right, call the vote. That carries 4-3. Thank you very much. All right, which brings us to the next discussion: is do we want to link smoking with the smoking of cannabis, or keep them separate? My personal thoughts are, if you're going to go with a total ban, you now have to keep them separate. That's sort of the quid pro quo in that. Otherwise, you're going to have a whole bunch of unintended consequences. So I'm prepared to move that motion that we keep smoking separate from cannabis, but we do need to update our smoking bylaw. Eventually, at some point, that still has to happen. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Van Newkirk.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would support your position there about keeping it separate. I stated earlier that I was looking forward to the discussion on cannabis and tobacco and bringing them together or not, because I truly am looking forward to the discussion and thoughts of fellow councillors on that, because as municipalities have been dealing with cannabis, I've been focusing solely on cannabis. Obviously I have personal thoughts on enforceability, and yes, if you want to have no smoke coming out of anyone's mouth, then you ban it all. Personally, I haven't got there yet. I think we should deal with it separately, and I wholeheartedly support updating what's currently there. So I would support what you just put forward.
Councillor Stout.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I support your motion as well. I think these two should be kept separate. Cannabis is a separate product to tobacco for the reasons I've already discussed, namely that cannabis also shares some of the social considerations of alcohol use, and therefore it should be treated separately.
Councillor Barnhart.
Thank you, Your Worship. I need clarification on what the motion is, because I think we're all saying basically the same thing, that we need to consider how they're different and how they're going to be enforced. So could you maybe, or could the administration read back, or I don't understand what the motion is.
The motion is to deal with them as separate items, because if you deal with the smoking of cannabis and the smoking of tobacco in the same way, and we put an outright, and right now council has voted to bring a draft bylaw back, so we're going to get another kick at this cat. To bring you back around to my way of thinking, Councillor Munkoff's way, but so basically so if you ban cannabis smoking and you marry it with tobacco, then you've done the same thing, and so then you run into the law of unintended consequences, where people can't smoke outside bars, go for a quick one, or they can't come to work and then go anywhere in town and have a smoke. So I don't, as much as we do have to update our smoking bylaw, because I think there's some room for improvement, I think an outright ban on tobacco is not the way to go, so I'd like to see them kept separate. Councillor Barnhart.
I understand what you're saying, and I totally agree. But when I read the words on the paper, I'm not getting that you could do anything but consider the impacts of tobacco on whatever the bylaw is. So I don't know what the other choice is. If we don't say yes to what you have said, like are these the exact words that the motion will take, that council will need to consider the impacts? I'm sorry, I'm pushing this one because I just don't understand what the other alternative is.
Well, there's two. We're looking at two alternatives. One, deal with it as part of the cannabis bylaw, and have the same regulations that affect cannabis affect tobacco. And my motion is that we don't do that, and we have separate regulations for tobacco and separate regulations for cannabis.
Okay. I agree with what you've said, but that's not what this says on the paper.
That's not what it says on the paper, but that's not what my motion is, not what's on the paper.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Daniluk.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Springham, if I put you on the spot and you feel comfortable answering my question, I totally respect that. But if we do go down the path of a ban on cannabis and we don't have a ban on smoking at the same time, we have two standards, right? A smoking standard and a cannabis standard. I understand that. As a professional, if you feel comfortable answering my question, what is your professional opinion on the enforceability of having two separate standards for two things that can be smoked? One being a standard of a ban on cannabis and also a standard on smoking. Now, I know it's a very difficult question. I'm putting you on the spot, and I understand that. So if you're not comfortable, but it does help me get my head around. I'm of the opinion, as I mentioned earlier, of a ban on smoking and cannabis. Consensus of council seems to be a little bit different, and I'm open to being convinced and open to that, but I do appreciate the professional opinion of a person who would be involved in enforcing two sets of rules, if you feel comfortable answering.
I think I can sum it up with respect to when you're looking at the bylaws, you know, in a common sense way, it makes sense to actually have both of them together in the same bylaw so that you actually end up having something, there's continuity. What we need to understand with cannabis being that the newness of it, the legislation, there are some, I will say there's some unknowns. You know, we might be speaking differently 5 years down the way about how cannabis is maybe affecting in a culture certain way here in Beaumont or in other municipalities. The one thing that I've seen with some other municipalities that have separated both tobacco or their smoking bylaws and their cannabis, what cannabis allows that if anything changes with cannabis currently right now, we're able to deal with it separately in that piece of legislation. Yes, like when I look at our current smoking bylaw, it predates what's out there provincially. You know, we set it 6 meter distance back in the day, and it's 5 meters, you know, currently. So for me going forward, it's going to give us a lot of latitude if we create that separation. It's going to create the sort of a clean look to the bylaws and give different options. So when we can tackle cannabis right now and then explore what does it mean to go, if we were to go to, you know, more higher restrictions with tobacco. So that's in a nutshell for what I would say in that.
Councillor Munkoff.
Thank you. This is a tough one for me. I fully support taken aside his position on cannabis, Councillor Danilek's position with regards to keeping it simple and within one bylaw. But I find myself, given the fact that we're asking you to bring back a direction on total ban, I can't vote for this. I can't vote for us to bring tobacco together. So the motion that you put forward, I'll vote for it. But I think I need to go away and do my own thinking about how we bring this forward, and whether it's through a notice of motion to try and update the smoking bylaw, not just to provincial regulations, but to the other comments that I've already made. So I'll vote for your motion and go away and do some thinking. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion? All right, call the vote. All in favor? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for sitting with us while we went through the prolonged discussion.
We very much appreciate your time, Your Worship, and councillors. We look forward to seeing you again on September 11th.
All right, item 7B, 2017 report to community. Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Your Worship. Before you is a recommendation for Council to accept the 2017 report to the community. The report is based on the previous Council's 2017-2022 strategic plan. Performance measures for each of the strategic outcomes are reported, as well as some of the accomplishments and key projects and initiatives during the year. So the report will be circulated, or has been circulated to elected officials, and will be available to the public in Beaumont facilities, website, and through social media and events. I'm here for any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. I read the document. I like it very much, except for the pictures of council.
Through your worship, those are the only pictures we have on file at this time. I understand that communications will be setting up time to get your pictures. I believe initially the council didn't want to have professional pictures taken, but that has changed since you see your mug shots. So
I've changed my mind.
Yeah, no, that's fair. The report will be once the pictures are done. The report will be released on social or on the website and everything. So I can put Daffy Duck and all those guys in there if you want in the interim.
Might be better. I look like I don't want to say what it looked like, but it's not good.
So I mean, the pictures are there, and I realize that those have to be updated. There was a couple other adjustments and that we've made in regards to a phone number that was missed and you that was missed, and my apologies. Going through that document, so those updates will be done. So my understanding is that communications is in the process of setting up pictures. Now, if you each have a mugshot that you would like to present that is respectful, I can add them in, and we can get it onto the website, sooner than later.
Fair enough. So, do I have somebody prepared to make the motion to accept the document as amended? Councillor Van Newkirk.
Yes, I would make that motion. Am I able to comment?
Yep, please.
Through your worship to the presenter, a lot of information, which I come to expect when you come and talk with us, and I like it. there's a lot to go through. There's a lot of numbers in there, but the one that intrigued me a lot was the website visits per month, and just from 2012 through to 2017, how we've went from 8,000 to 8,500 to 9,000 to 1,200 to 16,000 to 19,000 in 2017. And I will be really interested in, as we put as we update that number and get into 2018 to see if we stay at 19,000 or see if we just incrementally grow. As we continually push our marketing and media and social media numbers and our push and some of the good work that administration is doing there, I would love that to be 20 to 25,000, because then that means people are looking at what we're putting a lot of time and effort into. And I do want to recognize administration for putting time and effort into the communications and marketing and seeing some improvements there. So I wanted to highlight that among all the other good information in there. So thank you.
Councillor Barnhart.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Harris, for the report and all of the data, and everything's good. What I was hoping to see would be some mention of FCSS under People Services, and I'm kind of surprised that because I'm trying to think back. I know that there was an increase in provincial funding. There were some additional positions added. I don't know if that was perhaps not the measures weren't there. I'm trying to again think back to how the previous council had determined what it was going to collect here. But I do remember raising issues around People Services being not just definitely being an employer of choice is important, and that comes under People Services. But our work with the community surpasses our recreation. It's also in the area of counseling and youth development, and it's kind of mentioned in here, but not in any measurement, no measurement of it. So I'm just wondering if that's at all possible at this stage of the game.
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Barnhart, the rest of council and the public. In regards to getting the information going forward, we can do it. It's a matter of starting to track that information and keeping track of those specific outcomes that council is interested in. That's something I can talk to Mr. Hiltz about, and we can start looking at numbers. In regards to events that they hold and so forth, I think they've been combined in with the other events, but that's something we can look at, and moving forward we can include in the document.
So, Mr. Harris, you're saying that some of these numbers on page, I'm not sure what page this is, 19 out of 21, I think it is, adult community programs or children in the community, like our child care numbers, any of those numbers included in there?
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Barnhart. In regards to childcare numbers, no, they haven't been included because there is a cap of 138, and it'd be the same number going up and down. And the thing you may want to put in is a wait list, but those items haven't been included in the past. Going forward, we can include it.
Well, I wasn't only thinking of that, but sorry to interrupt, but counseling numbers as well. Requests for counseling, I know that went up last year.
We can look at,
again, it's retrospective, and I understand you haven't got the numbers, you can't put them here, but I was just surprised that the numbers were not included, because I remember talking about it. So,
Ms. Mohammed wants to make a quick comment.
Thank you, Your Worship. The report has been drafted based on the strategic plan, the way that it was written. So if you look at it, it's got the strategic outcomes, which were, like if you look at the top of page 16, it's got the 2 strategic outcomes there. But if you were to revisit the actual strategic plan, they have a list of how we will measure that. And actually, in all that list, there is no reference to FCSS data. So when they prepared this report, they would have just put the measurables based on what was outlined under each outcome. So that's likely why you're not seeing that data in there. Yeah.
And just to clarify, next year's report to the communities will be based on this council strategic plan. So Absolutely. It's going to look much, much different anyway. So when we can probably track some of that stuff. Yeah. Any further comments or questions on the motion in hand? Okay, hearing none, all in favor. That carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Harris. Next item on the agenda is item 7C. We have a notice of motion from Councillor Stout armorial bearings from the Canadian Crown. I'll ask Ms. Naradin to speak to it, followed by Councillor Stout to make the motion and then make his comments. Ms. Naradin?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to members of Council and the public. At the July 24th Council meeting, Councillor Martin Stout made the following notice of motion. The Council directs administration to send a letter addressed to the Chief Herald of Canada stating that the town of Beaumont wishes to receive armorial bearings from the Canadian Crown under the powers exercised by the Governor General. We're recommending Council to direct administration on how to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stout.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Shaima. Your Worship, fellow councillors, the motion I'm placing before us tonight requests the Governor-General of Canada to grant a coat of arms for the exclusive use of the town, or as it may become the city, as it may become the city of Beaumont. A slight point of clarification I need to make, first of all, is the use of the term armorial bearings is the same thing as a coat of arms. It's just a more formal, technical name, sometimes also inaccurately referred to by people as a crest. Grants of arms are an honour conferred by the Crown of Canada. They are patented and universally recognised in perpetuity. A grant of arms would acknowledge our history, honour our reputation, and recognise the contributions made by our municipality to Canada and to the community at large. All of our neighbouring urban municipalities, as far as I can tell, have already been granted coats of arms. So that's City of Edmonton, City of Leduc, Strathcona County, City of Wetaskiwin, as well as many others across Alberta besides. Following our recent vote to seek city status, and with the consequent need for us to rebrand and to create some new symbols for what will become Alberta's newest city, I believe it's now time for us to seek the honour and the royal recognition of being conferred by a grant of armorial bearings. The Beaumont coat of arms, were it to be granted, could then be displayed not only on signs and flags and letterheads, but also on town buildings, the town hall, council chambers, the new aquafit, and also on, for instance, vehicles, transit buses, police officers, patrol cars. So I'd like you now to refer you to the procedure guide. It's up on the screen. Granting armorial bearings in Canada. It was included in your attachment package. And if we could just run through this, Shaima, I will point out a couple of things. The first part is the arms at the top there are the arms of the Canadian Heraldic Authority, and there's a description of them. This document is in English and French. I'm just going to be dealing with the English part because my French is not good enough. Please proceed. There's a detailed description of granting armorial bearings. I should note in passing that municipalities across Canada are entitled to ask for a grant of arms. The process is then described in some detail. And there is a sample. This is were the arms granted to the town of Penhold, Alberta, which breaks down what the grant includes into all its component parts. A grant of arms to Beaumont would not be identical with this. The whole point is that it is different, but the form would be the same. It's simply the colours and the details that would be different. It would have all the same items. Can we proceed? One thing I should draw our attention to is that there's a list here that of corporate bodies should forward a brief history and a copy of the document establishing their legal existence in Canada, a current annual report or financial statement, and a copy of the resolution from the governing body, that's us, requesting the grant. So that's what we're voting on tonight. There is a cost associated with this, if we could come further down, depending on the exact options that are chosen simply for the award of the grant, the way the grant is displayed, and the documents and the letters patent that are used to show it. So the option 1 cost which I think is normally associated with people applying, individuals applying privately, that's option 2 cost. The option 1 cost, which is normally associated with municipalities, will be between $1,800 to $3,300 for art and calligraphy. The option 2 cost is slightly cheaper. That's typically used by individuals applying for a grant of arms for themselves. I'll also note that the average time required to complete a grant is 12 to 14 months after the warrant has been signed. And if we go a little further down, those options are shown. If we keep going down, please, Chima. The options are shown, there we go, with a number of, that's what letters patent look like, granting the arms. That, interestingly, is a grant of arms made to the city of Leduc. Those are the Leduc arms. If you go into Leduc council chambers, you will see that document displayed in the council chambers, as well as the Leduc arms. And there are a number of the other options are also described in full detail. I should point out as well that the letters patent include there the 3 coats of arms at the top are the Governor General, who at that time was Adrienne Clarkson, the Crown in Canada, so Queen Elizabeth II, and the arms of the heraldry office that was shown at the beginning of the document. Could we refer now to the flowchart granting of heraldic emblems, which was also included? Thank you. A couple of things. This is a flowchart that takes us through the process of the 12 to 14 month process. The opening of the file is the first thing that happens when we make, if we decide to vote in favour of this resolution. The second thing I'd draw your attention to is the research and concept proposal. It requires that we provide, that the Herald's office provides a written description of the proposed concept, including its elements and meaning, is sent to the petitioner for approval. So this will come back to us when the design is finished. And that's only done after a lot of input from the town regarding from the municipality regarding the history and symbols that have been used in the past, and aspirational ideas as well. And following that, the next stage, preliminary art, is also sent to the petitioner, that's us, the municipality, for approval, together with the artist's invoice. At that point, we have to pay them, after having initially paid the administration fee to open the file. And finally, could we please open the third attachment, which is, this is a grant of arms that was awarded to Strathcona County, included, and again, this goes through the design and describes the symbolism of all the various components that were chosen for Strathcona County. When this was unveiled on 9th September 2015, then Mayor of Strathcona County, then Mayor said, Roxanne Carr said, "We are honoured to be granted this traditional mark of honour by the Canadian Crown. Our coat of arms represents our unique history and heritage, which we conserve, celebrate, and upon which we grow. It celebrates our distinct identity as a specialised municipality and is a source of community pride." That's all I have to say in favour of the motion.
So, just so I'm clear, you're moving option number 2, that council direct administration to send a letter, etc. Is that what your motion is?
I am moving that option send a letter to the Chief Herald of Canada, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Barnhart.
Sorry, I just have a question, Your Worship, and maybe it's to Councillor staff. Is it as the town we're requesting, or would it be different if we waited till we became a city? I guess that's the one question.
Well, that's sort of my comment as well. I think we are putting the town, I think we're a little early in this. I'm very much in favor of things like this. I've been through this process a number of times with a number of other organizations, not necessarily coats of arms for cities or towns, but other organizations that were looking for some type of granting of a badge or a heraldic thing. And it's never as cheap as they say. Let's get that one straight right now. So there is a budgetary item attached to it. I think the last one I was involved in cost us $10,000, just give or take. But I do not want to muddy the waters between town and city. If we apply now and send it now, we're sending it as the town of Beaumont because that is what we are. If in 3 to 4 months the province comes back and says you're the city, there is potential that they could have wiped out everything. We have to start this whole process all over again and repay. So while I'm very much in favor of doing this, I'm not going to vote in favor tonight because I think we are about 4 months early. I'd like to see it come to budget and then see if Cabinet grants us our city status that we all want, and then we can go through this process fresh, clean, and easy, and I would support it then, but not tonight. Further comments? Councillor Moncasway.
Respectfully, Your Worship, I disagree. I think Councillor Stout has outlined the process here. Sure, we'd be applying for it from the town, but there's a lot of time for us to come back and work with it. I'm not even going to guess the governing bodies that you went through, but work with the appropriate governing body to go through. I think the process is pretty clear there that, we have option to come back and forward. When it comes back to us, I'm sure we're able to work with them to identify it as the city. It takes 12 to X months. I'm supportive of this. Obviously, Councillor Stout has done a lot of research, a lot of passion around this, and so I'll be voting for this motion tonight.
Councillor Reinhardt.
Thank you, and I wonder if we can get an answer to that question, because that, to me, is the key question. Can we apply as Beaumont right now, or do we have to reapply it? And I don't know who has the answer to that question, or if that's something we have to get more information on and vote on this at another time, because I don't want to vote against it, but I also don't want to have to do it twice.
Ms. Naradin, or Ms. Mohammed, actually. Sorry.
Thank you, Your Worship. We actually don't have the answer for you on that tonight. If we don't know what the process would be to change it from town to city.
Because honestly, I would support it if we knew the answer to that question too, and if it wasn't going to be adversarial. Mm-hmm. Is there appetite to defer this and find out the answer to that question? Councillor Hendricks.
Bishop, thank you. Perhaps a friendly amendment just to say pending city status approval.
Councillor Stout?
I'm certainly comfortable with that, although I don't believe it's necessary. The reason I moved this now rather than later was simply because it is a 12 to 14-month process to complete the end. And it's not until we would certainly, I anticipate, was the motion to move to becoming a city not dated for the 1st of January?
Yes.
2018?
Yeah, but we'll know sometime this fall whether or not they're going to grant it, so we should know significantly earlier whether or not it's going to happen. So
then in that case, then I don't think it'll make any difference. I think with the grant is made to the municipality. I think the actual document, when it's written up as letters patent, will say city or town as is appropriate. But certainly we could, yes, I'd be willing to accept a friendly amendment that we defer this until we have acknowledgement from the province as to whether or not they're going to approve our city status.
Fair enough. So we've now got an amended motion. You don't want to speak anymore?
No.
Councillor Van Newkirk.
Yeah,
stop hitting your button. Go ahead.
I'm good.
You're on now.
Yeah, no, I would support the friendly amendment. I was going to say something else, but I support that friendly amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Mr. Harris has got a light blinking, or is that an accident?
No, it's not.
Mr. Harris.
To your worship, to the rest of council, my question as the finance guy is to approve this and the potential of funds starting to flow based on the methods that are there that have to be followed in the hiring of individuals. There currently isn't anywhere in the budget for this. So my question to council is, where are you going to fund this from?
So your record, yeah. This is where I usually push it back on you and say, find me money. Or we can wait, or literally the next budget cycle is coming up here in 2 months. We could make it a budget item.
Through your worship, to the rest of council, you can use your contingency fund, the $50,000 to do that. But I just wanted to let council be aware, based on the mayor's earlier comments, that this does come with a price. And just want to make sure that it's not currently reflected in the 2018 budget. So we have to find a source of funds, and contingency fund is one source.
Okay. Yeah, let's worry about the motion and whether or not we want to do this, and then we'll worry about how to fund it. Councillor Daniluk.
Thank you, Your Worship. I endorse this idea fully. I appreciate Councillor Stout's diligent research on the topic. I think waiting to city status granted by the province is probably a good idea. And my last point is I do support the motion and friendly motion as amended. I would also volunteer to assist if there's I'm assuming there'd be a council committee struck to go through the various parts of the coat of arms and deciding. So I'd like to volunteer for that committee should it be struck. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not that far yet. I don't know how we're going to do this. Yeah, no worries. Appreciate that. Yeah, I would vote for it as amended and then bring it to budget as a line item for next year's budget. And then get the process going. I don't think 2 months will kill us. So any further comments on the motion as amended? Any problems with council if we bring it back to budget for funding? Can we add that little friendly amendment to bring it to budget for funding?
I'm sorry, could you?
Well, sorry. Either that or we'll just make a second motion to bring it to budget for funding of it, because we don't, it's currently an unfunded project.
So would we not fund that from contingency?
We could. It's not something I'd usually spend contingency on because it's a nice to have, not a need, but.
Yes. Then do we wish to add it to the 2018 budget?
I would, that's where I'd like to. It's budget literally is 2 months from now, so we can.
Yes, I agree.
It's quick, so.
Let's amend it to add it to the 2018 budget deliberations.
2019.
I beg your pardon, 2019, yes.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no further discussion on the motion, all in favor? That carries unanimously. And we're going to take a short 5. Yeah, no, it's not, don't get me wrong, I'm very supportive of it, but I just.
You don't have to do it.
Yeah.
I don't think that's actually a eventuality, but.
Those guys
scared. Let's fund it properly, let's. The last one we did all the ducks in a row. Last one we did, you said that. The same. Oh, I did it with so we had a question. We wanted to get and so it's not exactly the same. We're not the same process. That's another step because that has to go. That literally has to go.
All right, call the meeting back to order. All right. Next item up on the agenda, item 8A, bylaw 904-18, the land DC redistricting, first reading. Mr. Wong.
Yep, thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. The department received an application to redistrict a portion of the southeast quarter section of 33, Township 50, Range 24, and west of the 4th Meridian in the Elon neighborhood from AG Agricultural District in the Rural Service Area to Direct Control District 117, Elon District. The subject area is currently undeveloped and is located north of 50th Avenue and west of Range Road 243, as shown on attachment 2 of the report. The purpose of this application is to accommodate a range of dwelling types and densities in compliance with the proposed Elon neighborhood structure plan, while encouraging diversity in built form and achieving a more efficient use of land. This is the first redistricting application on the lands Beaumont has annexed as of January 1, 2017. The proposed district allows for flexibility and diverse housing types that reflect the trends in the region, market conditions, and best practices. The new land use bylaw will not be adopted until early 2019, anticipated, and a direct control district is therefore required to allow development to proceed, as the lands must be appropriately districted prior to subdivision. The proposed direct control district is consistent with the objective and policies of the Elon Area Structure Plan, as well as the proposed Elon Neighborhood Structure Plan. The Elon NSP Neighborhood Structure Plan received its first reading on July 24, 2018, and proposes a variety of land uses that include low and medium density residential, commercial, an urban village, and open spaces development. It also provides lands for a school site to meet the community's needs of student population. Approval of this redistricting application will not be presented until the proposed Elon Neighborhood Structure Plan is approved by Council later on. The application was circulated to affected boards and agencies, affected civic departments, as well as adjacent landowners for comments. No outstanding concerns regarding this application was received before the meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, do I have a member of council willing to move first reading? Councilor Barnhart.
So moved, Your Worship.
Thank you. Comments?
No.
Any comments from council? Okay, I have one question. Everybody knows this, I'm not a fan of DC districts. They're very messy. It's much easier and much cleaner if it fits within the land use bylaw, because everything else has to come back to council. So why are we doing a DC district?
Yes,
we have no other options?
Yeah, as mentioned in my presentations there, we would like to probably, yes, we agree that this direct control district is, I shouldn't say messy, but it is a specific site development proposal. But because the development has to proceed, if it is proceeding today, they need a district, a land use district, in order for them to subdivide the land. And that is why we need to do a rezoning for a direct control district for now. And it will be absorbed in the 2019, the new land use bylaw. That is our intent. So
that was my next question. We can clean this up in the new land use bylaw. It's going to go away.
Yep.
Yeah, because DC districts that have the authority as council.
Yeah, it is simply a timing issue. Yeah,
it has issues.
Yep.
Having said that, very supportive of seeing development go forward, and it's nice to see that we're moving and that it's going to go. Councillor Stout.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just for my clarification, when the new land use bylaw is passed, this district will be conforming and will cease to be a direct control district?
We are planning on not having a direct control district. It will be absorbed in the new land use zones, land use district in the new land use bylaw. So it will become a conventional zone that is in the land planning language. Just like what is included in the current land use bylaw. For example, it is an R1.
Yes.
Or R2, whatever, yeah, so it will not be a DC.
So at that point, it ceases to be a DC, or do we need to pass?
It will not be a DC, it will be a new conventional zone, yeah, whatever name of new zone is.
And apart from passing the new land use bylaw, we don't need to, council does not need to reconsider, to do anything else, to pass any other resolution?
No, that will be a new land use bylaw. It will be a bylaw that the council will have to consider through the public hearing and the first and the second and the third reading. Yeah, so for the land use bylaw. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion? All right, call the vote. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda tonight, bylaw 924-18, cannabis regulations, retail only land use bylaw amendments, second and third reading. I believe Ms. Dargy is up.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Earlier this evening, a public hearing was held for bylaw 924-18, a land use bylaw to define and regulate cannabis retail stores. During that public hearing, there were no submissions made, so we are recommending Council give first, second and third reading to the bylaw.
Thank you very much. Do I have a member of council prepared to move second reading? Councillor Stout.
So moved, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Barnhart.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess, Ms. Dargy, my question is around the choosing not to include childcare centers as schools, and just clarification around that, because I was kind of surprised to hear that we do allow liquor stores to exist right beside a childcare center. I think I know the rationale, but I'd appreciate hearing your rationale why we have not put that into place. And I, you know, in my heart of hearts, I'd like to see children separated from liquor stores and cannabis retail outlets, but I think I understand our commercial zoning issues. So could you maybe articulate that so I can make sure that I have it right? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barnhart. So, as you know, the commercial land availability in Beaumont is quite tight. And so if we were to regulate any kind of separation distance between the two uses, childcare centers and retail cannabis stores, we would essentially be eliminating one of those two uses out of a potential commercial center. And if we leave that early childhood services out of the definition of schools, either one of those uses could come in. They're both discretionary uses, so there is some discretion to the development officer to consider whether or not they should be directly beside each other, or if there could be still some separation distance between a couple of bays. Now again, we're talking about the retail sale and not the consumption. So just like a liquor store can be located near a childcare center, so could a retail cannabis store.
Councillor Moncalfe-Swain.
Thank you. And Mr. Narada, if you could pull up page 15 on the agenda, please. I appreciate it's going back, but this is where the comment is. So right there, yeah. So third bullet point says, in regard to the potential locations for cannabis retail stores and restriction on hours of operation, majority of residents wanted the market to dictate the concentration of retail stores. So I read that to mean that the majority of people want the market, yet we are putting in place a 500-meter restriction from within each cannabis retail store. I appreciate we do that for liquor stores. I'm curious as to why. Why do we care? Why should we care whether there is a cannabis store right next to each other? Again, to the survey's comment, should we not let the market decide?
Thank you, Councillor Moncalfe-Swain. So there's 2 points actually. If you go to the point above, regarding the separating distance between recreation facilities, parks, daycares, cannabis retail stores, the majority of respondents preferred a minimum of 500 meters, and 23% favored a distance between 100 and 400 meters. So reading that in conjunction with the next one, in that they wanted the market to dictate it. There's also, there was also a note, I'm trying to find the point, where they wanted it regulated similar to liquor stores. So based on a legal review and discussion with legal counsel, because no one knows the the effects of cannabis use, cannabis consumption, and the retail sale of cannabis yet. The recommendation is to start with a more stringent approach, and then if we can relax it, if there's a determination that we can relax it at that time. It's easier to pull back, as you heard earlier this evening, than it is to kind of roll it forward. With that as well, we tend to, or we don't want to concentrate certain uses together, because then you can start to get a concentration of unfavorable uses to each other. So by having a separation distance, that provides that buffer between those negative impacts on those from those uses.
Okay, just a follow-up if you don't mind.
Yep.
So I appreciate that, and but you also, in the same voice, you said to Councillor Barnhart that this is not consumption, this is retail. Yeah. So I get where you're trying to go to here, but to speak to the second point regarding separating distances, people looked at recreation facilities, parks, daycares, and said the maximum, and kind of between stores was kind of lumped in with that. And I think if you ask the general public, if it just asked about general retail stores, they'd probably want it more separated than not. But I'm just curious as to why. Like why? I can't, and I have the same question about liquor stores as well. Now, do I want to see, the new commercial space up here with 6 liquor stores and 5 cannabis stores? No. But then when I think about it, why? Like why? The market should dictate that, and if I can't see looks like we're going down a full cup ban on public consumption, so you're not going to be able to smoke outside or anything like that. So I'm challenging the 500-meter rule, and I appreciate it contradicts our liquor license, and if there is support to do that from council, then I'd also like to consider the liquor, but I'd also like to hear from councillors who are probably part of the bylaw when it was initially updated to include that 500-meter piece, to see kind of the thinking behind that. I don't have experience in it, so I'd be curious in other people's thoughts while they were going through that as to why 500 was picked. So all in to summarise, to say I would challenge 500 metres, and I'd like us to consider having no restriction on space between retail stores.
May I answer? So thank you. And to follow up with that, so the 500 meters was chosen because it's in line with our liquor stores. The history to that was when our land use bylaw was rewritten, there was some direction to provide separation distance between liquor stores. So 500 meters was a common distance for surrounding municipalities, so we follow that 500-meter separation distance. However, there are a number of liquor stores in Beaumont that aren't 500 meters apart because they were here prior to that land use bylaw being adopted. So there's very few liquor stores that are actually 500 meters apart. Having said that, with the rewrite of our land use bylaw, we are looking at that separation distance. So for consistency's sake for this amendment, we kept it consistent with the current liquor store regulations. As the new bylaw comes forward, that separation distance will be looked at again.
So, yep, sold. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sort of on the same page you are. I gotta admit that one's slipped past me. I'll support it tonight to be consistent, but during the next land use bylaw update, I wouldn't mind spending a little time having a discussion surrounding that and seeing if we can't come to a better balance, because we are quite compact. Okay. Councillor Van Nieuwkerk.
Hello, through you, Your Worship, to administration. Can you help me further to Councillor Barnhart's questions around schools, the discretion of use, and something like tutoring services and stuff? I have not been able to wrap my head around that. I was wondering if you could re-explain how that falls into this. It was explained initially in the public hearing part by administration, and I thought I understood it, but now I'm a little bit confused again. Thank you.
Sure. So to that, so schools are defined under the School Act, and if you just give me a moment, I'll actually pull out the definition so I don't misquote it. So a school means a structured learning environment through which an education program is offered to a student by a board, an operator of a private school, an early childhood service program, private operator, and a parent giving a home education program. So it's very wide, broad definition, and it does include tutoring. It includes vocational colleges. It includes things like Oxford Learning Centers. So that's why we included the additional clause, 4.6.3, to clarify when there is a school in a commercial center, because again, our commercial centers are very tight, and so we don't want to preclude some of those different uses from being in those areas.
Okay, thank you. Got it.
Councillor Daniluk.
Thank you, Your Worship. I concur with Councillor McCoff-Swain's comments on the market and 500-meter distance, but to clarify, Mayor Stewart, your comment a moment ago, if I'm clear, if we were to approve this bylaw tonight, which would have 500 meters between cannabis retail locations, we can revisit this at the land use bylaw review process in the fall. Is that
That's correct. We have a whole new land use bylaw coming, so we can make an adjustment in that one then.
My only comment is, if I'm a retailer opening a cannabis store in Beaumont, which I'm not, by the way, but if I was, I'm conforming to this bylaw right now. So I'm choosing my location based on these current rules, which we might say we might change in the fall to, let's say, make it 250 meters apart, which means I may have chosen a different location if, as a retailer, lease rates could be cheaper at another location had we had a choice of being 250 meters apart, not at 500. I'm just asking for clarification of that, because I think this would affect, I believe that if we did this with the idea of revisiting the fall, we may have a retailer who's making a decision on his or her business now on the current rules, and that would, if I'm that person who could choose location A at 500 meters apart or location B at 250 meters apart with cheaper rent or cheaper lease rates, I'd be unhappy. I'm just clarifying that could be a potential pitfall. Is that a correct assessment, Ms. Darcy, or?
Yeah, that's just asking. Theoretically, we could go down there. Right now, I think we've had, what, 2 people apply to the government?
So yeah, to clarify, we've actually accepted development permit applications in advance of this so that we could start reviewing them. Yeah. We've had 3 applications submitted to us. We have had comments expressed to us that certain commercial locations won't lease out to this type of a use. So we have no control over that. Right. The regulations are proposed to be the same as liquor stores, so liquor stores could have the same, concern that you're talking about. But I think if we start at 500 meters and then we reduce it, that's actually providing more opportunities.
I would agree. In the future, it would.
In the future,
present time. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that.
Councillor Barnhart.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I really am perplexed, and I think I'm going in a bit of a circle, but my concern is that we're making allowances for the school to move into the commercial area, and by school I mean the relocating of the Francophone school. Mm-hmm. But we're not going to make any allowances for early childhood services programs. And I'm trying to get my head around, the only logic I can see here is from an economic standpoint, but yet the distance between a school and a cannabis store, the 100 meters is put into place for that school because we have concerns about children being exposed to cannabis, the sight of it. So it's inconsistent to me. On the one hand, there's a school, we're saying we're going to keep it 100 meters for that school, but we're not going to separate it for the daycare center. So I'm just, the rationale is bothering me on that.
Through your worship to Councillor Barnhart, I just want to chime in on that about the early learning childcare centers. We do have quite a few early learning childcare centers within Beaumont, which would actually probably preclude this type of commercial development from occurring within the town. We also have a number of home-based daycare centers, which were very difficult for us to measure. We don't know where they all exist, which did start to bring into account on that 500-meter buffer. And then with that, anyway, I'm just going to stop there. Thank you.
So basically, the scope narrows, and all of a sudden we don't have room to put anybody. So unfortunately, we do have to draw a line somewhere, and that may be it. Ms. Dargy, do you have any further comments? Or?
Sure, just to add to that, when this information was brought forward to the council at the committee of the whole, it was indicated that the 100-meter buffer would be maintained from schools. And the intention at that time were schools as commonly known as schools, so our school sites. When we started to look more at the definition of school, what that all included, there was also at that committee of the whole meeting a map provided to you as, what would that look like if we started to regulate it around daycare centers. And again, to Ms. Raymond's comment, we have so many daycare centers that it would essentially preclude any type of retail cannabis sale store in Beaumont. But by maintaining it from schools, that's consistent with what we heard from the survey. It was consistent with what we heard from the committee of the whole, and that's what was consistent when we went out to the public. When we communicated schools, the intention was schools as in the proper school, on a school site. When we moved the Francophone school into the commercial site, we needed to deal with that as well. And by adding that section 4.6.3, it provided clarity around that school site.
This one, and I won't be voting for this one in second reading, mainly because I think the younger people in the early childhood program, they in my mind are the most vulnerable. And if I understand the reason for the separation, it's not about whether they're going to do well in the marketplace or not. It's about the impact on the children in the school, children attending the school. So to be consistent, I just can't see the way we've separated this as being okay. I'll be voting against it.
Fair enough. Further discussion on the motion. Councillor Montcalf-Swain.
So just to speak to your comments then, my concern is then if we went down your path, I totally get where you're coming from, and I think it's just an unfortunate situation we're in, where if we were to say no to this, what does that open us up to legally? Because essentially, if we went down that track, then we wouldn't allow any retail stores in Beaumont. It's pretty black and white. So I'm just curious on how if you had any thoughts to getting around that. Yeah, I know where you're going, and I'm there-ish, but I'm not. So I shouldn't say that. I'm not there because I don't think we can get around from a legal perspective. I'm just curious on how you thought we would manage that. Convince me.
Well, I guess just like, if I may.
Go ahead. Yeah, no.
If I may, if we're excluding school from the definition being early childhood services and home ed, we could also exclude temporary school relocation and say, in that case, they're not covered by the 100 meters, then it's consistent. And I guess if you're okay with it being inconsistent for young kids, then why aren't you okay with it being so that to me would be the solve. I'm just trying to be logical about it and be consistent. And I do have a soft spot for early childhood services, and I think if we're not concerned because it's not the consumption of, then why are we concerned about the school?
Fair
you
point.
asked and I answered.
No, good. I mean, unfortunately, you answered it well.
Ms. Mohammed, sorry, Ms. Raymond, I forget you're all moved.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Barnhart here. We are being consistent with provincial legislation regulations, which is where that 100 meters from the school to the healthcare facility from the cannabis retail location does come in. With that, where would you actually, we don't regulate how far an early learning childcare center needs to be from an alcohol store currently. They are in the same strip mall in a lot of instances. So for us to start to regulate that, would we also look at those changes considering how we have brought this into line with the alcohol, trying to maintain that consistency as well?
Just to be clear, if I may, Your Worship, I'm jumping in here. I would say take it out of both. Don't restrict it to the school or the daycare, and that would be consistent.
Yeah, but you're crossing into, if I heard correctly, we're crossing then into a provincial line. It's now a school.
But so is early childhood services and home ed. I read the act today because it had me almost. And if we put in C's, I'm looking at 4, I don't know if you want to bring it up, 463 ABC. That's where the crux of my concern is.
Page 87 and 91 of the document.
It's in red on my screen. So, you know, in the case of the school, it talks about that quite specifically, and C talks about excluding early childhood services and the home ed because that was in the provincial act as a definition of school. If we've taken those two out, we could take another one out.
So to clarify, Councillor Barnhart is correct. The provincial legislation requires a municipality to modify the distances, the separation distances between a cannabis retail store and a school. And the school is defined by the provincial legislation. So this is what our solution was, but if there is a different solution that council wants, we can make that amendment. The provincial legislation allows us to do that.
Fair enough. Councillor McGough-Swain.
I think to put a bow on this, for me, I think retail store to me is a completely different connotation to consumption. If this was a consumption discussion, I would certainly be down that road with you. But retail store and the restrictions that are there, I'm okay voting for this, consistent with a liquor store as well. Again, someone's going to be able to go in and buy a box of beers just like they're going to be able to buy marijuana. It doesn't mean they're going to be smoking outside it. I get where you're coming from, but to put a bow on it, I'm supportive of the motion that's on the table.
Any further discussion on the motion? All right. Yeah, a couple of my final thoughts. I think leaving it as written. I know I get where you're coming from, and now that I've heard that clarification, it swayed my thinking a little bit. But I'm okay with 4.63B. Because it's a school, it's consistent with the rest of the schools within Beaumont, keeping that 100 meters. So that's why I'm going to be voting in favor of it tonight. And so we'll go from there. So anyway, final thoughts, call the vote. All in favor. Hang on. Cannabis regulation. Second reading. Start. All in favor. That carries 6-1. Do I have a member of council prepare? Whoop, back up. Sorry, that carries 5-2. Do I have a member of council prepared to move third reading? Councillor Stout.
So moved, Your Worship.
Discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All in favor? That also carries 5-2. Thank you very much. All right, brings us to councillor committee reports. Before I open it up to all of council, I got a couple of updates from myself. It's been a pretty busy month. So the first good news story today it was my privilege to attend Leduc County Council's meeting where they voted 7-0 to support some funding for our Aquafit Center. So they have committed to $2.4 million towards the capital costs and ongoing operational costs going forward. So I'd like to thank Councillors Munkoff, Swain, and Daniluk for sitting on the committee and shepherding the process through. Good work, gentlemen. I'd like to thank this council for being supportive and working with our council colleagues in the county and getting it done. It was sort of noted today that this was really our first kick at the cat at doing a joint project with them in this term, and so hopefully it's not the last item that we get to do before the 4 years is up. But it's nice to see that we're very supportive and we can get the Beaumont Sports and Recreation Center. I hate Aquafit too, but get it moving forward and starting to see some money come in from other levels of government to help offset the burden for our taxpayers. We also had CAO Schwartz and I spent an excellent half an hour with the Minister of Infrastructure, Minister Sandra Jansen, back on the 16th. And so we are going to be moving forward with a grant application. There's been a couple of really good avenues that have opened up for us. And so administration is currently working on a grant application, and I expect an update, not tonight, but coming forward on where that's at and how it's going. So hopefully more good news to come, and we can see some things going on there. So other than that, that's all I had. Full fall coming up. The EMRB is going to get back in full swing, and I expect more updates in the future. Are there any other members of council wishing to address council tonight or have questions of me? Councillor Barnhart.
Thank you, Worship. And I didn't include this in my report, my councillor's statement, because it was actually something connected but different. And it's a new program that's been launched in Alberta to help finance greening of residential properties. And they're looking for municipal support for this before they actually roll it out across the province. And it was presented at the breakfast, the regional breakfast for the Edmonton Metropolitan Regional Board. So I thought it would be appropriate for council to have a look at in the administration and maybe bring it back at
could we
Committee of the Whole?
Could we turn it over to administration and get a copy for council?
I think so, because I mean it's quite innovative, and provincial support, regional support, I think that would be a good idea to look at it.
No, awesome. I think it's a great idea.
Okay.
Councillor Monkosway.
Thank you, Your Worship, and just to let my council colleagues know that I will be away out of the country as of September the 7th. So I will be in attendance to the September 11th meeting via Skype, but I'll be missing the Committee of the Whole meeting and the subsequent, the second meeting on the 25th of September, if I'm doing my math right. So just want to let council know that, but I'll be attending via teleconference, Skype. We'll figure it out for the September 11th to make sure I'm here for some good discussions around ACLAFID, and looks like first reading of a cannabis consumption bylaw. So thank you.
It's going to be an interesting meeting. It's also going to be interesting. That's going to be our first kick at the cat with technology, so it should be good too. Are there any other members of council wishing to speak tonight? And don't feel pressure. All right, brings us to item 10, update from the CAO, and Ms. Mohammed is pinch hitting for this week. So Ms. Mohammed.
Thank you, Worship. It's my pleasure to be acting as CAO this week. Really simple message of welcome back. We're in for a really busy fall, and we have a lot of really great projects underway that we're excited to be bringing forward to council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so moving on, item 11A, correspondence. We've received a letter from our staff sergeant, Mr. Egan. Is there a member of staff willing to speak? Mr. Hills.
Thank you, Your Worship. Members of Council, Staff Sergeant Egan sent us a opportunity to be involved in a public crime mapping project. What that would enable us to do is we'd put a link on our website. Within X number of hours, they would have thefts from motor vehicles, thefts of motor vehicles, thefts under $3,000, break-and-enters, mischievous, and miscellaneous would be able to be mapped. That would be current for 14 days, and then the items would just appear off of that map. It's just an opportunity for them to do another crime prevention opportunity with the community, so that people will be able to track what is actually happening, opposed to what they perceive as happening. Thank you.
Yeah, this is, I played around a little bit with St. Albert's. It's actually quite a neat app. I personally would be supportive, so I'll make the motion tonight that we adopt this program within the town of Beaumont and be part of the pilot project. It hopefully will encourage all of our residents, because you always see on Facebook a lot, and I hate to do it, but sometimes they never report to the RCMP, so maybe this might give people some impetus to report it, and maybe we can get it up on the website and actually see what's going on. So discussion on the motion, Councillor Van Newkirk.
Hello, Your Worship. Yes, I'll support that motion as well. I was very encouraged. I actually first seen this pop up in the Town of Devon's social media feed, and I very quickly screenshotted it and fired it over to you, and then very quickly after that it popped up here on our agenda, so I was happy to see that. Also for myself, right off there it says it also encourages Albertans to participate in crime prevention strategies such as reporting suspicious persons or activity. So I'm really looking forward to the residents being able to report and then see the dot pop up, as clarified to the closest intersection for what they've put forward. The only part that I wondered about was the entries will be automatically removed after 14 days part. You just wonder if cumulatively we may not be able to continue that map and collect that data over a longer period of time. Semantics for the future. I'm happy to see it coming in the way that it's presented, and I think it'll be great. Thank you.
Fair enough. Councillor Stout.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I too will support the motion. I took the opportunity to review the St Albert map, and I think it's a terrific use of information technology to as a communication device, and yes, with obvious crime combating applications too. I'm very strongly support it.
Awesome. Further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, call the vote. All in favor? And that carries unanimously. All right, there being no further, are there any notice of motions this evening? All right, hearing none, there are no in-camera items, and so a meeting is adjourned.